All right, so ready to dive into another one.
Yeah, let's do it.
Awesome. Today, we're taking a look at the 2024 movie Wicked, which I gotta say, I'm pretty excited about.
Oh, yeah, it's a good one.
We got a request from a listener who sent in a summary of the film, but it's in Hindi Urdu, so they're hoping for some, some extra clarification on the story,
I see it.
which I think is a great idea because there's a lot going on. I mean, we've got a green-skin protagonist,
Right.
flying monkeys, we've got magic,
Yeah.
and honestly, a really interesting take on the classic, like, good versus evil thing.
Yeah, what's really interesting about this one is that it kind of flips the whole, typical good versus evil narrative
Mm-hmm.
on its head. Like, it actually starts with the villagers celebrating the Wicked Witch's death,
Oh, wow.
which, you usually see at the end of a story, right, where good triumphs over evil.
Right, right.
But then Glinda shows up, and she says this really thought-provoking line. These witches are not bad. They are made bad.
Hmm. Yeah, that's a great way to kind of set the stage, for this whole exploration of how someone becomes, labeled as wicked, and then you have that little girl in the crowd who asks, "How is a witch made?" Like, boom, right.
Yeah.
We're taken right back to the beginning, to the birth of our main character, Elphaba.
Exactly. And her birth is anything but ordinary, right? Like, she's born with green skin, which automatically makes her different.
Right.
And sadly, that leads to rejection, even from her own father.
Yeah.
Can you imagine, being rejected by your family just because of how you look?
Yeah. No, absolutely. It must have been really, really tough for her, especially at such a young age. And I think, it makes you think about how society can really shape how we see each other, even before we get a chance to, show who we really are.
Totally. And then on top of that,
Mm.
she has these, like, magical powers,
Yeah.
which seem to be connected to her emotions. Like, it's almost as if her feelings are so strong that they manifest as magic.
It's like she can't control it, or at least she doesn't know how to, right?
Right.
It just comes out.
Exactly. And that obviously makes her, even more of an outsider in a world that doesn't really understand or accept her for who she is.
So, I mean, it sounds like her childhood was pretty rough, huh? Like, not a lot of love or understanding from, her family or even society in general.
Right. But even with all that going on, you see this, like, really sweet side of her in her relationship with her younger sister, Rose.
Mm.
Rose is described as being, like, really beautiful, but she has a disability, and Elphaba is so protective of her,
Oh, wow.
which I think really says a lot about her character, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, totally. It shows that even though she's gone through all this hardship, Elphaba is still capable of, like, deep love and compassion, and she's not afraid to stand up for the people she cares about, even if it means going against what everyone else thinks.
Exactly. And, this relationship between the two sisters is really important for understanding her motivations later in the story. Like, it sets the stage for her commitment to protecting those who are marginalized, just like she feels she and Rose have been.
So this protectiveness eventually leads them both to the university, right? Although Elphaba isn't really there to study, she's just there with Rose, who's the one who's supposed to be enrolled.
Yeah.
And this is where they meet Glinda, who's basically like Elphaba's opposite.
Uh-huh.
She's popular, she's beautiful, she seems to fit in perfectly.
Right.
Which, I mean, can you imagine their first interaction? It's got to be interesting.
It's really interesting. Yeah, like, you have Elphaba who's, challenging conventions and struggling to fit in. And then you have Glinda who basically embodies those very conventions.
Right. Totally different personality.
Exactly. And it really highlights, how even in a place like a university, everyone has a totally different experience.
Oh, absolutely. And I remember that scene in Glinda's dorm room, right? Like, Glinda's super organized, everything's perfect.
Yeah.
And Elphaba's trying to assert herself, but then her powers go haywire. And it's just this, like, explosion of chaos.
Oh, yeah, that's a good scene.
It's a funny scene, but I think it kind of reveals, some of their deeper insecurities. Like,
Yeah.
Glinda's so focused on appearances and fitting in, and Elphaba just wants to be accepted
Right.
for who she is.
Exactly. And I think it sets the stage for this really complex relationship that they develop throughout the movie,
Yeah.
which, I mean, we'll get into more later.
Totally. And then, of course, you have the prince, right? He kind of comes in and shakes things up even more. He's charming, he's charismatic,
Wow.
but also a bit of a, like, rule breaker, Like, I think about that scene in the library where he's, like, climbing on the bookshelves and everyone else is trying to be quiet.
Oh, right.
And it's almost like he enjoys, like, disrupting the norm.
Yeah. It is interesting how he, like, disrupts things just like Elphaba does, but in such a different way.
Right.
Like
Right.
Elpha's disruptions are like accidental, driven by her emotions.
Mm.
But the prince, it's like he does it for attention.
Yeah, yeah.
That makes you wonder, like, what's his deal, you
Yeah,
know?
for sure. And it's Elphaba, who actually calls him out on it.
Oh, that's right.
She sees through his charm and questions, why he doesn't think the rules apply to him.
Mhm.
And it's a small moment, but I think it's really important because it shows like how differently they approach things. Like
Right.
authority maybe even hints at the paths they end up taking.
I think that library scene is important too because it shows how differently Elphaba sees the world compared to everyone else.
Yeah.
Like, everyone else is kind of amused by the prince and his antics, but she sees it as disrespectful.
Mm.
It really shows her sense of justice and her willingness to challenge people who, abuse their power, even if it makes her unpopular.
Like she's not afraid to stand up for what she thinks is right, even when it's hard.
Exactly.
And then you got the prom.
Oh, yeah, the prom.
Which, I mean, such a classic high school experience, but in Wicked, it takes on a whole new meaning.
Right. It becomes this whole commentary on, like, social pressures, especially for young women.
Yeah, yeah, totally.
And for both Elphaba and Glinda, the prom is a huge turning point.
Oh, for sure.
You see Glinda trying to manipulate the situation,
Yeah.
to make herself look good, which actually backfires.
Hmm.
And it shows, like, her own insecurities and her need for, like, everyone's approval.
Yeah.
But then she has this moment of, like, redemption where she chooses to stand with Elphaba, even though everyone else is making fun of her.
Yeah, that scene where Glinda joins Elphaba on the dance floor, it's really powerful.
Well, it is.
It's like this moment of real connection,
Yeah.
like they actually see each other.
Yeah, and it's in that moment that Elphaba shares a secret about her family. A secret that kind of hints that, like, there's more to the story than we realize.
Right, right.
Like, this perfect world that they live in might not be so perfect after all.
Definitely adds like a layer of mystery to the whole thing.
Yeah.
And then the focus kind of shifts to animal rights, which is a theme that seems to really resonate with Elphaba.
Oh, absolutely.
There's that scene where she connects with a professor who's advocating for, ethical treatment of animals.
Right.
And it's like she sees herself in these animals.
Yeah, like she identifies with them being ostracized and misunderstood.
Yeah, exactly.
And it shows her growing awareness of, like, the injustices happening around her.
Like she's starting to see like the bigger picture.
Right.
And all of this is happening while she's training with the principal,
Uh-huh.
honing her magical abilities, but still struggling with, her emotions.
Especially her anger.
Yeah, it's like her powers are almost like a metaphor for all this like pent up emotion that she's carrying around.
That's a good point.
And then it gets even worse when that new professor arrives with the caged lion cub.
Oh, yeah, that scene is tough to watch.
It's like a symbol of, oppression, of how those in power try to control everyone else.
Exactly.
And for Elphaba, it's a turning point.
Yeah, she can't just sit back and watch anymore.
Right, she has to do something.
She has to act.
And that's when she decides to free the cub with the help of the prince, which is, I mean, that's a pretty bold move.
Oh, yeah, for sure. It shows how far she's willing to go to fight for what she believes in.
And the fact that the prince helps her is interesting too.
Right. It shows that maybe he's not totally blind to what's going on.
Maybe there's more to him than we thought.
Maybe.
And then, of course, you have the arrival of the wizard,
Oh, yeah, the wizard.
who, I mean, he's like the ultimate authority figure, right?
Uh-huh.
And he comes in with all this fanfare, promising everyone a brighter future.
But he's also pretty manipulative, wouldn't you say?
Oh, totally.
Like, he's using his power to control everyone around him.
Yeah, he reminds me of those, like, politicians who promise easy solutions to really complicated problems.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
And his arrival really changes things for Elphaba.
Oh, how so?
Well, her personal struggles, like her feeling like an outsider, suddenly become part of this much bigger fight against, injustice and oppression.
Hmm.
It's not just about her own acceptance anymore. She's
Okay.
fighting for everyone who's being silenced.
Interesting.
It's really when they bring in the monkey that things take a really dark turn.
Oh, yeah.
The wizard, he asks Elphaba to perform a spell, making it seem like it's this, like, kind thing, to help the monkey achieve its dream of flying.
Right, right.
But her good intentions end up leading to these really horrible consequences.
Yeah, that scene with the monkey it's pretty disturbing. I think it's supposed to be, though.
Yeah.
It shows how easy it is for power to be abused, even when it's disguised as, as something good.
And Elphaba, she trusts the wizard, so she doesn't realize what's really going on. But then the spell goes wrong, and the monkey's left in so much pain.
Oh, it's awful.
It's like this really powerful image of how, unchecked power can lead to these unintended consequences and how dangerous blind faith can be.
And for Elphaba, it's a real wake-up call.
Yeah.
Like, she finally sees the wizard for who he is,
Yeah.
a manipulator who uses people to get what he wants.
Yeah, and it breaks her heart, She really believed in him.
She did.
And so she tries to escape, and Linda tries to stop her, and it's just this, crazy, intense scene that they're in a hot air balloon, there are flames everywhere, the guards are closing in.
Yeah.
It's like Elphaba's whole world is falling apart.
I think that scene's really well done, like visually.
Oh, yeah.
It's a powerful symbol of all the chaos that happens when power goes unchecked and people are manipulated.
And that's when Elphaba really chooses, defiance over conformity,
Yeah.
even if it means being labeled as wicked.
Exactly, and that's exactly what happens.
Hmm.
The principal, he feels threatened by Elphaba. So he starts this whole smear campaign to make her look bad.
Classic.
He accuses her of stealing a magic book, and suddenly everyone turns against her, believing all these lies.
It's like it happens all the time, doesn't it?
It does, unfortunately.
The people in power, they use fear and lies to, control the narrative and silence anyone who disagrees with them.
Exactly, and Elphaba becomes the scapegoat.
Right.
Like, she represents everything the wizard wants to get rid of.
And what's amazing is that she doesn't back down.
She doesn't.
She's done trying to fit in. So she embraces the label of wicked, and it becomes a symbol of, her power and her refusal to be controlled.
It's a really powerful moment of self-acceptance,
Yeah, totally.
Like, she's finally defining herself on her own terms.
Right, and then she flies away on that broom.
Oh, yeah, that's a great visual.
Just so symbolic.
It is. It represents her freedom from the system, but it's also, a separation from Glinda, who chooses to stay.
It's kind of heartbreaking, actually.
It is.
Their friendship, it was so strong, but their different beliefs about how to fight injustice end up, pulling them apart.
It's a classic dilemma, isn't it?
Mm.
Can you really change a corrupt system from within?
Yeah, it's something we're still figuring out today.
That's for sure.
And then, of course, there's Elphaba's curse on the Emerald City. It's
Right.
like her final act of defiance, a consequence of all the pain and cruelty she's experienced.
Yeah, it's like a scar left by all the injustice.
And it makes you think back to what Glinda said at the beginning. These witches are not bad. They are made bad.
Exactly.
Elphaba's story is really about how, societal pressure, betrayals, and the corrupting influence of power can really push people to make certain choices.
It really makes you think, doesn't it?
It does. It's a story that sticks with you. And it makes you question everything, like what is good, what is evil, how does power work, what do we do when we see injustice?
And it reminds us that good and evil aren't always black and white. There's a lot of gray area.
This has been such a fascinating deep dive into Wicked. And honestly, I feel like we've only just scratched the surface.
Me too.
But hopefully this has given everyone listening, a better understanding of the film and maybe even sparked some new thoughts and questions.
Yeah, I hope so.
Thanks for joining us today, everyone.
Thanks for having me.